But there are people who turn early levels of success into the appearances of success, and they turn it into, them driving a Ferrari or something on Instagram.
Yeah.
Look at me and my startup, and that can be so detrimental early on. I like to think long term, and we don't know when we're going to die, right? And one of my fears is that I would have regret, things that I could have done. And I think a lot of that was stoked by people I've met along the way who were a lot older than me. And by virtue of their being a lot older, I assumed, had lived their lives to the fullest. And I came to the realization that not all of them had, because they shared that with me. People have kind of told me, I could have done this. And when I was your age, I had this good idea. And I heard a lot of people tell me they had this good idea that they didn't follow through. And some of it was driven by the fact that I had done something, not to pat myself on the back as having done something amazing, but there were people who said that they had the idea of what I was doing, but that they had it way before me. And that now was kind of too late. Mm-hmm. And I just thought that, I don't want to be that person thinking, oh my goodness, you know what I mean? I could have done that, and I didn't. And reading a lot of entrepreneurial stories, some of them are stories of failure, believe it or not. They don't always end really well.
Sure.
Some of them end in failure. And once you get comfortable with the idea that things can fail, but that you tried, it's very freeing, right? I got comfortable with the idea I could try to do something big. And if it blew up, I could say, it's not like I could have, or maybe. I say I tried and it really didn't work, but I definitely tried, right? And I could live with that. That feeds back, I think, into anybody in the business, right? Are you comfortable with what you're doing? Like if you had to look back at your life and say, what did I wish that I did, right? Why didn't you? And it's okay to fail. And one area that personally came into play was, it's one thing to turn a blog into a magazine, right? Or make a Instagram page and all that stuff. But what was really lacking in the industry that I was catering to were events. And I mentioned that earlier in our conversation. But this was something that I did not know how to put on. And I had been to a lot of, and there was a demand for it to exist. And people were actually telling me, Sean, you should do this. You should put these on. And by the way, putting on an event, it's like a huge production. There's so much that go into it. And I think a lot of people don't realize how much goes into it, or how much it costs. And I started, my biggest fear was, well, one, it was going to cost a lot of money to do, but two, this thing could really bomb because I don't know how to do this, right? But I thought that it's something that needed to exist. And I didn't want to be known as the guy who should have created a conference, but didn't because he was too afraid, right? Or felt he didn't have the experience. I actually thought, well, I'd rather try, and it didn't work, than to have not tried it. And so the first conference we put on, I didn't even sleep the whole night before. Like I pulled it all night. I was up for like 36 hours straight. I was super nervous. And we had been pretty well prepared, but a lot of things were going wrong. And it had the potential to not go the way that I wanted. In fact, I was supposed to have this whole speech prepared, and I never got around to it. And I had to speak to 400 or 500 people with no speech. They put my notes in a teleprompter, which wasn't helpful at all, because I was just literally reading, like sentence fragments.
Sure.
And I was like, all right. I was like, don't look at that. Do this. And but you know what? It went okay. And after that, people were like, "This was great. When's the next one?" Mm-hmm. And I was like, "We did.
Yeah,
it worked." You know what I mean? And now look at us. And so in 2019, we actually did 4 events. So we went from just doing that one event where I was so nervous, so afraid, to doing 4 in 2019. We actually did one up in Toronto, right? Mm-hmm. We'll be back up there in 2022. but it's all about being bold. There's nothing wrong with failing. I think some people are afraid, or they think that there's some shame. And some of it might come from family pressure. Sometimes, you grow up in an environment where your family tells you to be happy with having a job and a salary. Don't rock the boat. Don't go off and do anything crazy. You know what I mean? Just put your head down, earn your money, get a house, whatever. And they almost want you to fail if you go off and do something bold, so that you return to the normal life that they want for you. And that kind of adds additional pressure, because imagine people almost rooting for you to fail, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you might even have friends who you think are your friends who are just waiting to say, I told you so. I told you that wasn't going to work, right? And you just have to block all of that out and just not care. And, I got to, I started to say, my life is about me and about what I regret or what I enjoy doing. And if I fail at something, I'm not going to feel embarrassed. I'm going to feel disappointed in myself for not having succeeded, but I'm not going to be embarrassed. And if someone tells me, aha, you failed, I'm just going to say, so what? I tried and you didn't.
Exactly.
Right? And so that's what it's all about. Being bold, not being afraid.
Well, I think like how people react to your successes or failures, whether they're big or small, it says a lot about them as well, because a lot of times if people are, if they lack action or motivation or making some of those moves that require a lot of effort, then they need to justify their lack of action by having people around them not get out of that bucket, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they want them to stay there at their level because it makes them feel more comfortable. And as soon as somebody is doing something that is breaking them out of that bubble, they become very uncomfortable, and they're basically not happy for those successes. So it's a great way to weed out people that you probably don't want to be in your circle, that probably you don't want them to be in your circle, rather, right? Just to see, as soon as you start being a little bit more active, it really comes to the surface.
Yeah. So, and one piece of advice I would give on that is, don't get ahead of yourself with your own successes, because if you start giving the appearance of success too soon,
right,
and you start creating this this image, that you feel you need to live up to. If you're like, yeah, I'm the number one CEO, all that stuff on social media, and then the next month your sales are way down and you're like hiding, right? And then you feel you need to live up to this image that you've created, right? So don't get ahead of yourself, and don't even make it about the image. I think people are quick to turn any early success, not a lot of people, but there are people who turn early levels of success into the appearances of success, and they turn it into them driving a Ferrari or something on Instagram. Look at me and my startup, and that can be so detrimental early on. Entrepreneurship is like this, ups and downs. You know what I mean? It's like the highs and lows. It's never a straight right up. And so then when you start telling the world, I'm this big shot who drives around in Ferrari because I had an awesome month, and then next month you can barely make payroll, you kind of create the situations where people are saying, I told you so. You know what I mean? So don't get ahead of yourselves in any of your successes. It's okay to be happy in your high moments, and it's okay to feel down in your down moments. But if you create this image that you have to live up to, it just makes it all the more worse.